Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're exploring the world of forensic psychology,
Oh, interesting.
but with a bit of a twist.
Okay.
We're looking at how experts analyze criminal behavior even when the victims can't speak for themselves.
So, like when they're no longer alive?
Exactly.
Wow, that's heady stuff.
It is.
How do they even begin to do that?
Well, that's where our source material comes in an interview with Dr. Rocío López Orozco.
You mean the one from that Pip and Chema podcast?
Yep, she's a forensic psychologist with decades of experience.
She sounds like she really knows her stuff.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is she works with both living individuals like inmates and deceased victims.
So she's got this broad perspective on criminal behavior, huh?
Right, and she uses this technique called a psychological autopsy to kind of reconstruct the victim's mental state before death.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that actually work?
Imagine trying to build a picture of someone's life, their relationships, their emotions, leading up to their death, like piecing together a puzzle.
It must be like super challenging though, right?
It is,
Right.
but by understanding the victim, you can also start to understand the potential perpetrator and what might have happened.
So it's not just about the victim, it's about the whole dynamic of the crime. So
Exactly.
it's giving them a voice even when they're gone.
And speaking of giving a voice to the voiceless, Dr. López Orozco also talked about how even physical evidence, like the injuries on a body, can tell a story.
Wait, seriously, how's that possible?
It's about looking for those telltale signs, the location of injuries, the type of weapon used.
And those things can reveal something about the perpetrator.
Absolutely. She used the example of Andrei Chikatilo, the Russian serial killer.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Really gruesome stuff.
Well, the way he injured his victims, the patterns, it actually told investigators a lot about his emotional state, his motivations.
It's kind of scary how much you can learn from those details.
It is.
But it's fascinating too, right? It's like a whole other language.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting when we start talking about what Dr. López Orozco calls the criminal personality.
Okay, what's that all about?
So she identifies four main components: egocentrism, aggression, emotional ability, and something called affective indifference.
So basically traits that make someone more likely to engage in criminal behavior?
Right, but here's where it gets really thought-provoking.
What's that?
Dr. López Orozco says she's observed these components in children as young as 4 years old.
Wow, 4 years old. That's really young.
I know, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It makes you wonder, are we saying criminal behavior is predetermined at that age?
Not exactly, but it raises questions about early intervention and how these traits might develop over time.
So, like, if you see a child struggling with intense egocentrism or aggression, it doesn't mean they'll become a criminal.
Right, but it's a sign that they might need extra support, guidance, therapy, things like that.
It makes you think about the role of environment, too.
Huge role. Think about two kids, both showing these early signs. One grows up in a loving, stable home. The other is surrounded by poverty, maybe even violence.
Yeah, their paths are probably going to be very different.
Exactly. It's not just nature versus nurture. It's a complex interplay of factors.
And that makes me think about Dr. López Orozco's experience working in prisons.
What about it?
Well, she made this observation that kind of blew my mind.
Go on.
She said that for some inmates, the structured environment of prison, the routines, the basic necessities, can actually feel more stable than their lives on the outside.
It's a weird paradox, right?
It is. You'd think prison would be a deterrent, but for some people, it might actually provide a kind of stability they've never had.
That's a really interesting point.
Makes you think about how we approach rehabilitation, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about punishment. It's about understanding the root causes of criminal behavior and addressing those.
Yeah. And speaking of complex situations, Dr. López Orozco's work with child criminals, that's a whole other level.
It is, and we'll dive into that right after the break.
Looking forward to it.
It's tough to even fathom what it must be like working with these kids, child criminals.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole different dimension.
Dr. López Orozco talked about a case, a 13-year-old boy
Oh, yeah.
who, along with a friend, murdered his own mother.
That's just horrifying.
It really is, and you can't help but wonder what could drive someone so young to such a horrific act.
Right. It's almost beyond comprehension.
Dr. López Orozco points out, though, it's often a mix of things, the environment they grow up in.
Sure, like if they've been abused or witnessed violence.
Exactly. It becomes their norm.
Like their childhood is stolen from them.
And then they become the perpetrators.
Right, perpetuating that cycle of violence.
It's heartbreaking. And then she talked about child sicarios.
Oh, those kids forced into violence by cartels and gangs.
It's another level of exploitation.
It's just, I don't know, it's just so sad.
It really highlights how crime isn't just about individual choices.
No, it's about poverty, lack of opportunity, a system that fails to protect its most vulnerable.
And it makes you realize the urgency of what Dr. Lopez Orozco was saying about early intervention.
Yeah, if we can identify these kids early on, maybe provide support, therapy.
Offer them a different path.
Exactly. Maybe we can break that cycle.
But how do you even begin to tackle such a huge problem?
Well, it's a massive challenge, Dr. Lopez Orozco admitted that, preventing crime entirely.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
But she emphasized focusing on those systemic issues. Poverty, dysfunctional families.
Right, and exposure to violence.
So it's not just about locking people up.
No, it's about creating a society where kids are safe, nurtured, given a chance to actually thrive.
And that brings us back to what she said about the impact of this work on her emotionally.
Oh, it must be incredibly tough.
To deal with these cases day in and day out.
Yeah, especially when children are involved.
She mentioned one that really stuck with her. The discovery of 2 4-year-old children murdered, left in a water duct.
Oh my God.
It's just chilling to even think about.
And it's not just her, the investigators, the forensic teams.
Everyone involved.
They must carry that weight.
Which is why she stressed the importance of self-care for people in this field.
They need outlets, ways to process all that trauma.
But what I found inspiring was that Dr. Lopez Orozco doesn't end on a note of despair.
No.
No, she sees a path forward.
And what's that?
Emotional awareness.
You mean understanding and managing our own emotions?
Exactly. Recognizing how we react to anger, frustration.
And modeling those healthy coping mechanisms for others.
Right. It's about creating a ripple effect.
Of empathy and understanding.
Starting with ourselves.
Maybe then we can create a society where violence isn't the automatic response to pain or conflict.
A more compassionate, understanding world.
It's a powerful message. There's potential for growth and change, even amidst all that darkness.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in building a better future.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important. It's not just about analyzing crime, it's about understanding ourselves.
It's about connecting those dots between individual behavior and the larger societal forces at play.
And I think Dr. Lopez Orozco's insights give us a lot to think about in that regard.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this intricate web. And our actions, our choices, have consequences.
It's about taking responsibility for our own emotional well-being.
And recognizing the impact we have on others.
And ultimately striving to create a world where violence becomes the exception, not the rule.
Well said. And on that note, a huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive.
We appreciate you being here.
We hope you found this exploration of forensic psychology as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
Remember, understanding human behavior is a journey, not a destination.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
You know, it's amazing how Dr. Lopez Orozco really brings this complex world of forensic psychology to life.
Yeah, she does.
And it makes you realize that understanding criminal behavior, it's not just about solving crimes, it's about understanding human nature itself.
Absolutely. It's like she's saying that to understand the darkness, you have to understand the light.
Or the lack of it, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's where her observations about prison life become so interesting, that whole idea that for some inmates...
Right, the structure of prison.
Yeah, the routines, the basic necessities.
It can actually feel more stable than their lives outside.
It's a real paradox.
It is. It makes you wonder how we can make the outside world more appealing, more supportive.
For sure. It's about going beyond punishment, addressing those root causes like poverty.
Yeah, and lack of opportunity.
And of course, we can't forget about early intervention, especially for those kids who show those early signs.
Absolutely. If we can identify those red flags, the egocentrism, the aggression.
And get them the right support, therapy, mentorship, whatever they need.
Exactly. Maybe we can change their path.
It's a reminder that we can't change the past, but we can influence the future.
For sure. But it takes a collective effort, society as a whole.
Absolutely. It's about building stronger communities, supporting families, creating genuine opportunities.
Especially for those who are most at risk.
And that brings us back to Dr. Lopez Orozco's message about emotional awareness.
It's a call to action for everyone, not just people in the criminal justice system.
It's about being more aware of our own emotions.
Right. How we handle anger, frustration, stress.
And then we can model those healthy coping mechanisms for others.
Exactly. Create that ripple effect of empathy and understanding.
Starting with ourselves.
And maybe, just maybe, we can start to break that cycle of violence at its core.
Well, this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It really has.
The world of forensic psychology, as Dr. Lopez Orozco shows us, it's a window into human nature.
The good and the bad.
Exactly. And a huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey.
We appreciate you being here.
We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.